The chill that settles into the bones on a quiet autumn evening can often be more than just the shifting of seasons. Sometimes, it carries the weight of secrets, whispered on the wind, waiting to be unearthed. And unearthed they are, in the most unlikely of places, under the most unassuming of circumstances. Imagine, if you will, a home, nestled in the heart of suburbia, its porch swing gently swaying, a testament to countless lazy afternoons and laughter-filled evenings. It's the kind of place where children's bicycles lie carelessly discarded on the lawn, where the scent of freshly cut grass mingles with the faint aroma of barbecues, and where the most dramatic event typically involves a runaway pet or an overly enthusiastic garden gnoming competition. But behind the facade of this idyllic normalcy, beneath the perfectly manicured rose bushes and the meticulously pruned fruit trees, lay a truth so dark, so profoundly disturbing, that it would unravel the very fabric of an otherwise ordinary existence. This isn't a story of monsters lurking in the shadows, or of ghostly apparitions haunting ancient halls. No, this is far more insidious, far more chilling. It's a story of the monsters we create, the secrets we keep, and the lengths to which ordinary people will go to preserve a fragile peace, even if that peace is built upon a foundation of lies and buried truths. Our tale begins, not with a bang, but with a whisper, a subtle shift in the earth, a misplaced curiosity. It started, as so many profound changes often do, with something utterly mundane, a home renovation project. Not a grand undertaking, mind you, just a simple expansion of a back patio, a desire for a little more space to entertain friends, to watch the sunset with a glass of iced tea in hand. The couple, Elias and Clara Thorne, were the picture of suburban contentment. Elias, a man of quiet determination, with a receding hairline and a penchant for classic rock, worked as an archivist at the local historical society, his days spent meticulously preserving the past. Clara, with her vibrant auburn hair that seemed to catch every ray of sunlight, and a laugh that could fill any room, was a beloved kindergarten teacher, her patience as endless as her creativity. They had built their lives together over 20 years, a comfortable rhythm of shared meals, dog walks, and whispered dreams. Their home, a quaint two-story colonial with a generous backyard, was their sanctuary, their haven. The contractor they hired, a burly man named Gus with calloused hands and a surprisingly gentle demeanor, was efficient and unassuming. He'd worked on countless homes in the neighborhood, his reputation for reliability preceding him. On a Tuesday morning, under a sky that promised a day of relentless sunshine, Gus and his small crew began the excavation. The roar of the small excavator filled the air, a familiar soundtrack to progress in residential areas. Elias was at work, immersed in ancient texts, and Clara was at school, guiding young minds through the wonders of ABCs and 123s. The backyard, once a verdant expanse of carefully tended lawn and flourishing flower beds, was rapidly transforming into a landscape of overturned earth and exposed roots. It was during the deeper excavation, well past the initial shallow layers, that the first tremor of unease began. Gus, wiping sweat from his brow, noticed a strange anomaly. Not a rock, not a pipe, but something different. Something wrapped in what appeared to be heavy-duty tarpaulin, unusually deep for any utility line, and certainly not part of the original building plans he'd reviewed. His first thought was a buried septic tank or perhaps an old, forgotten well. But the shape was wrong, too irregular, too deliberate. He paused the machinery, a sudden quiet descending upon the bustling construction site. He called out to his two assistants, young men still learning the ropes, their faces reflecting his own growing curiosity. Together, they began to carefully unearth the object, the tension in the air palpable. The tarpaulin, brittle with age and encrusted with soil, gave way under their cautious prodding, revealing not metal or stone, but something else entirely. Something that sent a cold wave of dread through Gus, a seasoned professional who had seen his share of strange discoveries. Beneath the layers of dirt and plastic, a wooden box began to emerge, crudely fashioned but undeniably a coffin. Not a full-sized coffin, but one unmistakably sized for a child. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant chirping of birds and the faint hum of traffic from the nearby street. Gus, his face now pale, his brow furrowed with a mixture of shock and disbelief, knew instantly that this was not a matter for him to handle. This was a matter for the authorities. He pulled out his phone, his hand trembling slightly as he dialed 911. The dispatcher's calm voice was a stark contrast to the swirling chaos in Gus's mind. He relayed the chilling discovery, the words feeling foreign and unreal as they left his lips. We found a coffin. In the backyard. Looks like a child's coffin." The response was immediate. Within minutes, the quiet suburban street was transformed into a tableau of flashing blue and red lights. Police cruisers converged, followed swiftly by unmarked cars, their occupants emerging with grim, determined expressions. The neighbors, drawn by the unusual activity, peered from behind their curtains, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and growing apprehension. When Elias received the call at the Historical Society, his heart plummeted. The police, his backyard, a discovery. The words were vague, yet laden with an undeniable sense of foreboding. He left immediately, the ancient archives feeling impossibly distant and irrelevant. Clara, too, was contacted, pulled from her cheerful classroom into a nightmare she couldn't comprehend. She arrived moments after Elias, her bright eyes wide with fear as she took in the scene. The yellow police tape, the solemn faces of the officers, the gaping hole in her once pristine backyard. Gus, still visibly shaken, approached them, his voice low and apologetic. "Mr. and Mrs. Thorne, I'm so sorry. We found something terrible." He gestured vaguely towards the excavated pit, unable to bring himself to articulate the gruesome details. The detective in charge, a tall, gaunt man with weary eyes named Detective Miller, approached them. His voice was calm, professional, but held an underlying gravity that sent shivers down their spines. "Mr. and Mrs. Thorne, we've made a discovery in your backyard. We need to ask you some questions." Elias, always the more composed of the two, managed to nod, his throat tight. Clara, however, felt a cold dread creeping up her spine, a whisper of a memory, vague and indistinct, trying to surface from the deepest recesses of her mind. She tried to push it down, to rationalize, to believe this was all some terrible mistake, a misunderstanding. But the sight of the growing crowd of onlookers, the hushed tones of the officers, and the unyielding yellow tape told a different story. The idyllic facade of their suburban life had shattered, revealing a darkness that had been lying dormant, patiently waiting, for decades. The secret, buried deep beneath the earth, was finally ready to tell its tale. And the telling, they would soon discover, would be a journey into the heart of a family's buried past. A past they never knew existed. A past that would redefine everything they thought they knew about love, loyalty, and the ultimate cost of silence. The air in the Thornes' living room, usually filled with the comforting scent of Clara's freshly baked bread or the faint musk of Elias's old books, now hung heavy with unspoken questions and the metallic tang of fear. Detective Miller, seated opposite them on their floral-patterned sofa, held their gaze with an unnerving intensity. He spoke slowly, deliberately, each word a stone dropping into a still, dark well. "We've confirmed it, Mr. and Mrs. Thorne. It is indeed a child's coffin, and unfortunately it contained remains. We're still in the preliminary stages of identification, but forensics suggests it's been there for a very, very long time. Decades, at least." Clara gasped, a small, choked sound that was lost in the sudden ringing in her ears. Elias reached for her hand, his own surprisingly cold. "Decades?" he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "But we bought this house 15 years ago. It was built in the early 70s. We've never known anything like this." Detective Miller nodded, his expression unyielding. "That's why we're here. We need to understand if you or anyone you know has any connection to this. Any history of the property that might explain it." The questions began then, a relentless barrage that felt less like an interrogation and more like a dissection of their lives. Where did they buy the house? Who were the previous owners? Had they ever noticed anything unusual? Any strange sounds, unsettling occurrences, anything at all that hinted at such a grim secret? Elias, ever the archivist, retrieved the original deeds and property records. He recounted the purchase 15 years prior from a seemingly unremarkable couple, the Millers, who had moved to Florida for retirement. He described their brief interactions, the polite smiles, the smooth transition of ownership. Nothing, absolutely nothing, hinted at the horror beneath their feet. Clara, however, was struggling. The cold dread that had begun in her spine now spread through her limbs, making them heavy, unresponsive. The whispers of memory, which she had tried to suppress, were growing louder, more insistent. Images, fleeting and disjointed, flashed through her mind. A swing set, a bright red ball rolling under a bush, a woman's muffled cry. She tried to grasp them, to make sense of the fragmented pieces, but they slipped away, like smoke through her fingers. She felt a wave of nausea, a dizzying sense of unreality. I don't know, she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. I can't imagine. Who would? She trailed off, the implication too horrific to voice aloud. Detective Miller observed her closely, his gaze unwavering. Mrs. Thorne, are you feeling all right? You seem agitated. Clara shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. No, I'm fine. It's a lot. A child. Buried in our backyard. She focused on the banality of the phrase, trying to ground herself, but the memory fragments gnawed at the edges of her consciousness. It wasn't the Millers, the previous owners, that haunted her. It was something else. Someone else. The face, indistinct, shadowed. The police had set up a perimeter, turning the Thornes' backyard into a forensic playground. Tents were erected. Floodlights cast an eerie glow over the scene even as dusk began to fall. Specialists in white hazmat suits moved with methodical precision, sifting through the earth, collecting samples, searching for any additional clues. The media, scenting a story, began to gather at the end of the street, their cameras poised, their reporters eager for any scrap of information. The Thornes' private tragedy was rapidly becoming a public spectacle. As the days bled into weeks, the investigation intensified. The remains were identified as those of a young boy, estimated to be between 4 and 6 years old, and the time of death placed sometime in the late 1970s. This time frame significantly predated the Thornes' ownership and even the Millers' tenure. The house had changed hands several times before the Millers. The police were now meticulously tracing the property's history, interviewing every previous occupant they could locate, delving into decades of ownership records, searching for any anomaly, any missing link, any family with a child that had simply vanished. For Elias, the relentless focus on the house's past became a painful echo of his own profession. He was used to sifting through forgotten histories, but never had those histories felt so raw, so intimately tied to his own present. He helped the police with names, dates, anything he could find in his archive's resources, hoping to provide clarity, desperate to untangle his family from this horrific knot. He immersed himself in the facts, clinging to logic as a defense against the emotional turmoil that threatened to engulf them both. Clara, however, was drifting further and further into a labyrinth of fragmented memories and growing unease. The images became more frequent, more vivid, no longer just flashes but fleeting vignettes. A young girl, her own age, with long, dark braids, giggling as she chased a butterfly. A heated argument, muffled by walls, followed by a sudden, sickening thud. The distinct scent of freshly turned earth mixed with something sweet, cloying, like lilies on a hot day. And then the fear, a palpable, suffocating fear that wasn't hers, but belonged to someone else, long ago. She started having nightmares, vivid and terrifying, of being buried alive, of being unable to breathe, of screaming into the void. She woke up in cold sweats, gasping for air, Elias by her side, his face etched with worry. One evening, as Elias was poring over old newspaper clippings the police had provided, a faint, almost imperceptible detail caught his eye. A small article, buried deep within the community news section of a 1978 local paper, reported the disappearance of a 4-year-old boy named Michael Peterson. The article was brief, almost dismissive, stating only that the child had wandered away from his home in the Willow Creek neighborhood and was presumed to have been lost in the nearby woods. The address listed for the Peterson family, the very street they lived on, and then the jolt, the house number. It was theirs. Elias's breath hitched. He reread the article, his eyes scanning every word, his heart pounding in his chest. Michael Peterson, 4 years old, disappeared from their address in 1978. Could it be? Could this be the child? He looked up, his gaze finding Clara, who was staring blankly out the window, lost in her own internal torment. "Clara," he said, his voice a strained whisper. "Clara, look at this." He showed her the newspaper clipping, his finger trembling as he pointed to Michael Peterson's name. Clara took the paper, her eyes slowly focusing on the words. As she read, a strange, unsettling calmness settled over her, replacing the fear. The fragmented memories began to coalesce, to form a coherent, terrifying narrative. The little girl with dark braids. Her, Clara. She had lived in this house once before as a child with her adoptive parents. But her adoptive parents had always told her they moved from another town, miles away. They had never mentioned living here. They had never mentioned Michael. The truth, or at least a chilling piece of it, began to dawn on her, painting the world in shades of cold, stark horror. The distinct scent of lilies, the muffled cry, the sickening thud. She remembered now, with a clarity that threatened to shatter her sanity. She had been playing in the yard, a small, curious girl, when she heard the raised voices. Her adoptive mother, Helen, a woman whose sweetness often masked a steely, unyielding core, was arguing with a man, a stranger. She had peeked around the corner of the house and seen something she shouldn't have. A struggle, a fall, a small, unmoving form. And then, Helen, her face pale and terrified, whispering urgently, frantically, "Don't tell anyone, not a word. This is our secret, our family secret, buried in the backyard." Clara dropped the newspaper, her face ashen. Elias caught it before it hit the floor, his eyes wide with concern. "Clara? What is it? What's wrong?" But Clara was no longer in the living room with him. She was back in that backyard, over 40 years ago. A terrified little girl witnessing an unspeakable act. A child burying a secret deeper than any grave. The child buried in their backyard wasn't just a child. It was her child. The child she had played with. The child whose laughter had once filled the very air she now breathed. Her adoptive mother had been involved. And the secrets, buried so carefully for decades, were now clawing their way to the surface, demanding to be seen, to be heard, to be finally laid to rest. The Thornes' suburban dream had become a living nightmare, and the journey into the past had just begun its most harrowing turn. The revelation hung in the air, a poisonous vapor, choking the very life out of the Thornes' carefully constructed reality. Clara's breath came in shallow, ragged gasps, her body trembling uncontrollably. Elias, still clutching the crumpled newspaper, stared at her with a mix of horror and profound confusion. "Clara, what are you saying? You lived here, with Helen, and Michael? What happened? Clara, tell me everything." His voice was gentle, pleading, trying to pierce through the veil of shock that had descended upon her. Slowly, painfully, the words began to spill from Clara's lips, disjointed at first, then gaining a horrifying momentum. It was as if a dam had broken, releasing a torrent of long-suppressed memories. She spoke of her childhood, a blurry landscape punctuated by moments of intense fear and an almost suffocating sense of secrecy. She had been adopted by Helen and Arthur Miller when she was barely 3, after her biological parents died in a car accident. They had told her they moved to Willow Creek from a bustling city, far away from any painful reminders. But now the truth was undeniable. They had moved into this house, right here, just months before Michael Peterson's disappearance. Her voice, thin and reedy, recounted fleeting images. Michael, a vibrant, curious boy with a mop of unruly blonde hair, constantly exploring, constantly questioning. Their shared laughter as they chased fireflies in the twilight. The way he would sneak her cookies when Helen wasn't looking. He was her first true friend, her confidant in a world that often felt bewildering. And then the arguments. Helen's voice, sharp and brittle, Arthur's, a low rumble of disapproval. She never understood the specifics, only the constant undercurrent of tension that crackled through the house. The day Michael disappeared was etched into her mind with terrifying clarity. It was a sweltering summer afternoon, the air thick and humid. She and Michael had been playing near the old oak tree at the back of the yard, building a sprawling fort out of discarded branches and old blankets. Helen had been inside, preoccupied with something. Arthur, Clara's adoptive father, was often away for work. Suddenly, a strange man had arrived, his face obscured by the bright sun behind him, his voice a low, insistent murmur. He wasn't a neighbor or a friend of the family. He radiated an unsettling aura, an air of desperation mixed with something darker. Helen had rushed out to meet him, her face tight with worry. Their conversation, though whispered, had escalated quickly. Clara remembered a flash of anger on Helen's face, then a desperate plea, then the struggle. Michael, ever the curious one, had crept closer, drawn by the raised voices. Clara had stayed hidden behind the oak tree, her small heart pounding. She heard a sharp cry, a sickening thud, and then silence. A terrible, absolute silence that seemed to swallow the very air. She had dared to peek out. The stranger was gone. Michael lay on the ground, still, unnaturally still, near the half-finished fort. And Helen, her face a mask of pure terror, knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she touched his unmoving form. She didn't mean to, Clara whispered, her voice breaking. I think he fell. Or maybe the man. I don't know. It was so fast. She recalled Helen's frantic actions, her desperate attempts to rouse Michael, the rising hysteria in her voice as she realized he was gone. Then the grim, chilling decision. Helen, with an almost inhuman strength driven by panic and desperation, had carried Michael's small body towards the back of the yard, towards the patch of earth where the old rose bushes were just beginning to bloom. Clara, hidden and terrified, watched as her adoptive mother, fueled by a primal need to protect their fragile new life, began to dig. Not a grave, not really, but a hurried, shallow hole. She kept saying, "No one can know. No one can ever know. This will destroy us, Clara. Our family. Our new beginning." Clara remembered the desperate urgency in Helen's eyes, the way her usually gentle hands moved with a furious, almost violent energy. Helen had wrapped Michael's body in an old tarpaulin, the same one Gus had found decades later, and placed him in a crudely constructed wooden box, hastily nailed together from scrap wood. Clara, a traumatized child, had helped, her small hands numb with fear, carrying handfuls of dirt to cover the unspeakable. The scent of lilies, plucked from a nearby bush, was sprinkled over the fresh earth, a macabre attempt to mask the smell, to add a semblance of reverence to a horrifying act. When Arthur, her adoptive father, returned that evening, Helen had concocted a story. Michael had wandered off, lost in the woods. They had searched, cried, pretended to be distraught. The police were called, the missing persons report filed, the brief news article printed. Everyone believed it or pretended to, and Clara, a child burdened with an unbearable secret, was forced to become an accomplice in the cover-up, her silence a heavy, suffocating blanket. Helen had ingrained in her the profound danger of revealing the truth. If you tell Clara, they'll take you away. They'll take us away, and we'll never be a family again. The fear of losing the only family she had ever known, coupled with the trauma of what she had witnessed, sealed Clara's lips for over 4 decades. The memories were pushed down, buried so deeply they became hazy, indistinct, almost like a nightmare from which she couldn't fully awaken. Until now, Elias listened, his face a kaleidoscope of emotions. Shock, grief, anger, and an overwhelming sadness for the innocent child his wife had been. "Helen, she was your mother," he said, the words feeling alien, twisted. "She did this? And she made you keep it secret?" Clara nodded, tears streaming down her face, finally free to flow after so many years. She was so afraid of losing everything, of what people would say. And I was just a little girl. I didn't understand. I just wanted to belong. The implications of Clara's confession were staggering. Not only was the child in their backyard identified, but the chilling truth of his death and the subsequent cover-up implicated Clara's own adoptive parents. The peaceful suburban life they had cultivated was a sham, built upon a bedrock of buried secrets and unimaginable tragedy. Elias knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the core, that this information had to go to Detective Miller. There was no other choice. Justice, delayed for over 40 years, had to be served, no matter the personal cost. As Elias reached for his phone, Clara placed a trembling hand on his arm. "Wait," she whispered, her eyes wide with a desperate plea. "What will happen? To me? To our family?" Elias looked into her eyes, seeing not just his wife, but the traumatized little girl she had been. "I don't know, my love," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But we have to tell them. For Michael. And for you, Clara. For all these years you've carried this alone." The weight of the family secret, buried for so long, was finally about to see the light of day. And with that light would come the inevitable, painful unraveling of everything they held dear. A reckoning with a past that demanded to be acknowledged, and a future that was now utterly, irrevocably uncertain. The truth, once confined to the earth, was now fully unleashed, and its repercussions would echo through their lives, forever changing the meaning of home. The quiet hum of the Thornes' suburban home, once a symphony of domestic peace, was now permeated by the heavy silence that follows an earthquake, the echoes of shattered foundations. Elias had made the call to Detective Miller, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. He recounted Clara's confession, every horrifying detail, as Clara sat beside him, pale and fragile, her eyes fixed on some distant, unseen point. The detective's initial shock was palpable even over the phone, followed by a swift, professional shift into action. Within hours, the yellow tape reappeared, more prominent this time, engulfing not just the backyard but the entire property. Forensic teams returned, now with a new, sharper focus, their movements precise and grim. The next few days were a blur of intense questioning. Clara, under the guidance of a compassionate victim support officer, relived the nightmare in excruciating detail for Detective Miller and his team. She spoke of Helen's fear, her desperation, and the chilling coldness of Arthur Miller's complicity. Arthur, Clara's adoptive father, had returned that evening, seen the makeshift grave, and without a word, had taken a shovel and helped Helen finalize the burial. He had then participated in the elaborate charade of searching for Michael, of mourning a child they knew was dead and buried meters from their back door. Their motive, it became clear, was rooted in a desperate desire to avoid scandal. Helen had been involved in a contentious affair with Michael's biological father, a man who had suddenly appeared on their doorstep, demanding money and threatening to expose their illicit relationship to Arthur. The confrontation had turned violent, culminating in Michael's accidental death in the ensuing chaos. Helen, terrified of losing Arthur and her carefully constructed life, chose to bury the truth, dragging Arthur and a traumatized Clara into her web of deceit. The story was beyond sensational. It ripped through the quiet community like a wildfire, fueled by the insatiable appetite of local and national media. The Thornes' address became a landmark of macabre fascination. Reporters camped outside, their microphones thrust forward, their cameras flashing, desperate for a glimpse of the woman who held such a dark secret. For Clara, the public scrutiny was a torment. Every news report, every whispered rumor, felt like a fresh wound. She was no longer just Clara Thorne, beloved kindergarten teacher. She was the woman whose family buried a child in the backyard, the child accomplice. The judgment was immense, the questions relentless. Elias stood by her side, a pillar of unwavering support. He shielded her from the media whenever he could, his own quiet strength a stark contrast to the swirling chaos around them. He saw not the accomplice, but the terrified child, the victim of a manipulative mother and a complicit father. He reminded her, constantly, that she was brave for speaking the truth, for finally unburdening herself after so many years. He held her hand, stroked her hair, whispered words of comfort late into the night when the nightmares returned with renewed ferocity. Their love, forged in the crucible of everyday life, was now being tested by an unimaginable horror. Yet it held, proving to be stronger than any buried secret. The police investigation quickly moved beyond the Thornes. With Clara's testimony, they meticulously pieced together the fragments of the past. Helen and Arthur Miller, long deceased, could not be brought to justice in a courtroom, but the truth of their actions was now undeniably exposed. The official missing persons case for Michael Peterson, dormant for decades, was finally closed, reclassified as a homicide, with the Millers named as the primary suspects. The community, once steeped in a comforting sense of small-town safety, reeled from the revelation. Neighbors who had known the Millers, who had shared pleasantries and potlucks with them, were left to grapple with the monstrous betrayal hidden beneath a veneer of normalcy. For Clara, the external chaos was a reflection of her internal landscape. The truth, while agonizing, brought with it a profound sense of liberation. The suffocating weight of the secret, carried for over 40 years, had finally been lifted. She began therapy, slowly, cautiously, unpacking decades of trauma, guilt, and repressed emotions. She learned to separate the terrified child she was from the courageous woman she had become. The process was long, arduous, and fraught with pain, but it was also a journey towards healing. She visited Michael's grave, now properly marked and cared for in a local cemetery, leaving small bouquets of lilies, a poignant act of remembrance and repentance. Elias and Clara's lives would never return to what they once were. The house, their sanctuary, would forever carry the weight of its dark history. They considered selling, moving far away, escaping the relentless whispers and curious stares. But in the end, they decided to stay. To leave, they realized, would be to let the secret win, to let the past continue to dictate their future. Instead, they chose to reclaim their home, to infuse it with a new kind of peace, a peace built on honesty and healing, not on deception and buried horrors. They renovated the backyard again, but this time with a profound understanding of the earth beneath their feet. They planted a small memorial garden for Michael, a quiet space of remembrance, a testament to a life lost too soon, and a symbol of the truth finally brought to light. The story of the family secret buried in the backyard serves as a chilling reminder that appearances can be deceiving, that even in the most idyllic settings, darkness can fester unseen for decades. It's a testament to the power of truth, however painful, to finally bring closure and allow healing to begin. And for Elias and Clara Thorne, it was a harrowing journey that ultimately redefined their understanding of family, forgiveness, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. This story, like all tales worth telling, invites us to look closer, to question what lies beneath the surface. It compels us to consider the echoes of the past that shape our present, and the profound courage it takes to confront the darkest corners of our own histories. If this journey into the depths of a hidden family secret resonated with you, if you felt the chill of the truth slowly revealing itself, then don't forget to like this video to show your support. And if you want to stay updated on more compelling stories that delve into the mysteries of the human experience, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Your engagement helps us bring these powerful narratives to life, and we deeply appreciate your presence on this journey with us. Until next time, stay curious, and remember, some secrets are just waiting for the right moment to be unearthed.